Morning. Thank you for being here this morning. We want to talk about a couple of things today. Releasing the joint development agreement, but I want to talk today a little bit about the sort of the process of how we got to the signing table. It's a little bit of a interesting journey of how we got there. First, though, let me thank a couple of thanks. One is to the board of directors of the Alaska Gasline Development Corporation. We have some here today. We have the executive director, Keith Meyer. He will speak afterwards and talk more directly about the JDA itself. Dave Cruz, Hugh Short, Joey Merrick, David White, Warren Christian, Commissioner Mark Lucan, and Commissioner Heidi Drygas. I also want to thank the producers. You know, this wouldn't have happened but for their willingness to transition this Alaska into the lead on this project. On February 16th, February of 2016, I never thought that when they made that offer that I'd be standing here today talking about what I'm going to talk about. So I thank them for that offer that they made, and it was transitioned over to AGDC, and I thank the legislature for there being an AGDC. If that didn't exist, it would be nothing to transition it over to. So I thank the legislature for the funding of that, the forward thinking of that, and staying with the funding of that through this process. So. And also, of course, the AGDC staff had a tremendous amount of work in making this happen. And our own Office of International Trade, Shelley James, has been at the lead on all the international. Anything anybody involves a passport, she's involved in it at the very deep level. I also want to give credit to the Trump administration. Secretary Ross and his team have been absolutely phenomenal, and President Trump and his White House team have been very, very helpful as well in this process. So fast forwarding from February of 2016 to March of 2017. About a year later, we became aware of the travels plans that President Xi was going to come from China to meet with President Trump. And that began some sort of wheels turning about opportunities that we may have. We had some connections at the White House a bit, and we were able to sort of plant a seed about Alaska at the highest level. And also, that was about the same time as there was the interest of infrastructure projects around the country. Each state had to submit infrastructure projects. We submitted a list of which the Alaska LNG project was certainly notably at the top end of that list. In April 7th, when we had President Xi stop in Anchorage on his way back from a meeting with President Trump, President Xi and Madam Peng and the cabinet, the ministers of energy, minister of finance, minister of environment, all the, it was really unprecedented. It wasn't just a refueling stop. It was an opportunity for 4 or 5 hours of engaging with at the absolutely highest level in the Chinese government, because of all the ministers that traveled with President Xi to spend the time with President Trump. So it was really I think an unprecedented opportunity for Alaska to engage at the highest level. About 1 week later, Vice President Pence came through Anchorage on his way to an Asia trip. We had a chance to spend a few hours with him, give him a presentation on the gasline project on his way over to Asia, so we make sure he was aware of that. In May, there was an announcement from the White House about May 12th by President Trump and certainly through Secretary Ross about their interest in U.S. selling LNG from the U.S. to China. That was a big statement, one that we again one more step in that direction towards the market. About that time, AGDC President Keith Meyer was invited to participate at the White House in an infrastructure summit, and participated and presented the Alaska LNG project at that time. In that meeting, it was Vice President Pence, it was Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross, Secretary of Energy Ryan Zinke, and Secretary of Transportation Chow. So very, very high level. Again, one more time representing the Alaskan opportunity. In June of this year, First Lady Donna was invited by the government of China to participate and be a keynote speaker at a conference there. I've later learned that the First Lady, Madam Peng, was very involved in making sure all that went smoothly, and so another opportunity for sort of relationship building with between Alaska and China. On June 28th, I was invited to the White House with 3 other governors to present to President Trump the energy project of our state. And each of the 3 states, in addition to myself, talked about their particular projects, and I had a chance to present this directly to President Trump. He asked me after that meeting, he said, "How can I be helpful?" And I said, "The market, Mr. President. It's all about the market." So he said, "I'll see what I can do." Also on the 28th of June, I had an opportunity to meet with the President of South Korea, President Moon, in Washington, D.C., and witnessed the President Keith Myers signing the MOU with KoGas at that same time. KoGas being Korea Gas, the largest buyer of gas in Korea. In July 13th, the National Government Association a summer session was held in Rhode Island. 33 governors, the Chamber of Commerce of China, the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, the Bank of China, the President of Bank of China, U.S., and the Chinese ambassador to the U.S. Went to that conference and hosted one dinner with one governor, and that was me. And it was our team, the Alaska team. 32 other governors were scratching their head wondering why they didn't get invited, and there was interest in only talking to one delegation. That was the Alaska delegation. In August of this year, I hosted a trip from the president of Tokyo Gas, Mr. Hiroshi, came to Juneau. We spent a couple of days there in meetings and dinners at the house and getting to know. I'd met him a couple of times in Japan. Again, one of the largest buyers of natural gas in Japan, and actually been the recipient of LNG from Alaska to Tokyo since October of 1969. So it's not a new relationship, but it's one that he had not been to Juneau before, and so he enjoyed that opportunity. In September, latter part of September, I and one other governor, Governor Greiten from Missouri, we were invited to China to participate in the China-U.S. Investment Summit. We each spoke to this panel of financial folks in China. When we got done and learned that the wealth at the table was approximately $10 to $12 trillion. So it's a pretty significant group of folks on the financial side that put that together and invited us to participate in that. On that same trip in September, we had meetings with Sinopec, Bank of China, and the China's Investment Corporation, among other meetings as well. But at that meeting, it became evident that they were very, very interested in Alaska. I have been at this a little bit, and I can kind of gauge what level of interest these days, and that was something I had never seen before. It was unprecedented, the kind of interest that they had in Alaska. So at that time, we knew about the trade mission that was going to be happening. We had already applied, begin that process to qualify with the U.S. government. And so when we sat down with Sinopec, it became evident that it wasn't going to happen unless we stayed with it. And so our team, Keith Meyer, John Tahosky, and others stayed in China, stayed in Beijing, did not come back, and stayed until the deal was done. Back and forth, it just wasn't going to work. Wasn't enough time. So I'm very indebted to them as far as for them to stay on with that. It was important that we had some sort of an agreement. In order to get on the signing table, you have to have something to sign. You have to have an agreement of some sort. And so on October 26th, I was in Washington, D.C. to meet with at the White House, and also to meet with Secretary Ross to update them on where we were in this effort with our potential partners in China. At 2 o'clock that morning, when I was to meet with them, I got an email or a text from Keith from China with showing me the JDA was initialed by the appropriate representative of each company. So that morning, my first meeting was a breakfast meeting with the Chinese ambassador at the Chinese embassy. I was able to report to him that the joint development agreement was initialed, ready for signature. An hour later, I was in Secretary Ross's office, Secretary of Commerce. I was able to report to him that it was signed, and then later that day, I had a meeting at the White House with Gary Cohn, the President's advisor and Chief Economic Council chair, and also reported that it was signed that morning. So we found from there, we were told at that point we had made the traveling team. In other words, over 100 had applied to be on this trip. That you had to have a deal. You had to have, a legitimate deal with Chinese companies and U.S. companies. So of the 100 plus, they narrowed down to 30. We were one of the 30. So off we went to China, and we found out on November 8th, the day before the signing, actually November 7th, 2 days before the signing, that we had made the final cut. We were going to be at the signing table with the President Trump and President Xi. Other company of the 30, others would be at the table, a different signing, different day with Secretary Ross and the Vice President of China. And there were, I believe, about 5 companies that didn't make any signing. You just didn't know until you got there because each project was vetted at the highest level, and you had to be signed off by the U.S. government and by the Chinese government, each project at the table for the signing. So the vetting process was fairly significant. It was a tense moment for us as we received this list. I don't know if anybody's ever had kids in comp hockey, but when they post a list about who made the team, it's a moment for a parent as well as, and that reminded me a bit of comp hockey to see that list, and we were one of the 12. To give you just a flavor of the magnitude of others at the table with signing deals in China was President Kevin McAllister, President of Boeing Aircraft, Jack Frisco, the President of Cheniere Energy, Andrew Leveress, the executive chairman of DuPont, a combination of Dow Chemical and DuPont. John Rice was there, vice chairman of General Electric. Lloyd Bankfund was there signing as the chairman of Goldman Sachs, and Westinghouse Electric Company president was there as well. So these were major companies doing major deals between the U.S. and China. Let me just say a few words about each of the companies, and then Keith is going to talk in more detail about it. But I want to, the Bank of China, of course, is the 4th largest bank in the world, a very significant bank that is not unfamiliar with financing LNG projects of this nature, and they do that all over the world. Sinopec is the largest oil and gas company in the world. They are the 3rd largest company, period, in the world. We are very, very fortunate to be working with them. Their number of employees are pretty comparable to the number of residents we have in Alaska. So they're in the 700,000, 800,000 range of employees. And so the China Investment Company corporation is their sovereign wealth. It's like our permanent fund corporation. Theirs is the 3rd largest in the world, second only to Norway and Abu Dhabi. And they're an $813 billion fund, and so you have the buyer, the customer with Sinopec. You have the bank with Bank of China, and you have the investor with the China Investment Corporation. So it's to have all those 3 in the same document is impressive. I've had a lot of questions as I've gotten back from China. A lot of people are saying, so what's different? Some might recall a time or two in the past. There have been gasline announcements, there's been agreements, there's been handshakes, there's been all those kinds of things. What's different in this situation? Now, here's what I would say is different. One is we have market participation. This is the first time we've ever had market participation. 2 most critical pieces of an LNG project. One is the gas. Are you going to find the gas? And secondly, is there a market? And so the market is absolutely critical. The gas is found every day, put back in the ground up the north. The most proved gas in the world, as one of the producers said to me at one point. That's important. Support at the highest level. I mean, my goodness, to have the President of the United States and the President of China, the two, and then China is the biggest, is the largest resource consumer in the world, have the President Xi sitting there with President Trump at the signing. That's an indication of and having gone through the vetting process to get there. They had to make sure that the project was legitimate. It was going to work. There were benefits for both. So there's no question it's a large project. It's large companies and large benefits to both Alaska and to China. Now this is a phased project, which Keith will talk about. But I want to talk just for a second about the benefits from this project. The benefits to China are significant. There's a lot of discussion about the balance of trade. This is important. They're going to buy energy from somewhere, and to buy it from the U.S. This is certainly the largest opportunity to buy a project from the U.S. Plus, we're 7 to 9 days away. We don't go through another country. We don't go through a canal. Shipping distance is a significant advantage. So it's $8 to $10 billion a year to them as far as the balance of trade offset. Provides long-term, stable, secure supply of energy, which is very important to them. They think in increments of 100 years. They look very, very long-term. They don't look a couple years out. They're very long-term oriented. 80 million tons a year of CO2 emission offset by bringing clean-burning natural gas into their country. When President Xi's I believe it was his acceptance speech recently. It was about a 3.5-hour speech. He mentioned the environment about 90 times in his speech. There's very cognizant of the air issues, the benefits over there. And what's really good for us is it helps us as well. What we want to do. Obviously, Fairbanks has had some challenges on air quality in Fairbanks, and be able to be on natural gas, cheap, affordable natural gas is critical to them as well. So they certainly would benefit from this, as all communities, in one form or another. Benefits to Alaska: 10 to 12,000 construction jobs. Alaskans going to work. Here we are at the highest unemployment in the nation, and this project is a real opportunity for us to change that ranking significantly. When I went to work as a laborer, as a carpenter, and as a teamster on the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. The number Alaska uses for that project, again, another 800-mile pipeline, was 70,000 jobs all the way out. In other words, not just a construction job, but the secondary, third, and fourth layer of jobs is about 70,000. So we know it's not limited to just the 10 to 12,000 construction jobs, but that's what we're citing. $1 to $2 billion a year in revenue to the state. A very good thing to have, and that would go on for the duration of the project, whether it's 30 years, 40 years, 100 years. It would be that. This is just the beginning. The opportunity of the relationships we have with China. Their interest is in. We talked to them about some other resources we have, and they're very interested in other resources in Alaska. Certainly interested in oil, very interested in mining. But they said, let's get the gas one taken care of first, and I couldn't agree more. But it really will open up Alaska, perhaps like we've never seen it before, because lower cost energy. I've been to a couple of the mines around Alaska. We have 6 working mines. One of them said to me, I said, how long will you be operating? They said, it depends upon the cost of energy. If our energy costs continue to rise, it will limit how long we will operate. That's an existing working mine just out north of Fairbanks. So it's going to open up opportunities that we have not seen. The tourism opportunities. We certainly are looking at direct flights and working on direct flights between Alaska and Asia. 1.4 billion people in China, of which 100 million a year go on holiday. Boy, we'd sure like to get a slice of those going on a holiday to come to Alaska on direct flights, a 7-hour flight versus depends on how you go. It can be as high as 18 to 20 hours, depending on how you get there. So that's a significant advantage as well. So we're going to, and then one thing that sometimes comes up is who's going to own the line, and Keith will talk about that. We'll retain a controlling interest in the line. Alaska will. The volume of gas that is being our share of the gas is equivalent to about double what we use right now in Alaska, about 500 MCF, and that's just the gas that we found while looking for oil. We're not talking we need more gas. We'll expand the line and more pressure and keep going. So there'll be no lack of gas in Alaska. I'm sure of that. And the last thing I want to say is that we are announcing earlier last week I announced at the Resource Development Council annual meeting that we are going to be putting together a trade mission, Alaska business trade mission to China. Shelley James will certainly be at the lead of working with Commissioner Mike Navarre on that as Commissioner of Commerce to put that together to give the relationships that we have built in at the highest level in China can benefit many other areas of business in Alaska. China, of course, is our largest trade partner. Nearly $1 billion a year of trade we've had with them for some time on seafoods, and we certainly think we're going to see that increase. And so, I'm a bit of a student of Governor Wally Hickel. Every meeting in his office, he would take me over to a globe and he'd say, "Look at Alaska from the top down. Who do you see? You don't see Florida. You don't see San Diego. You see Asia. That's our market." And that's what we did with LNG for 40 years out of Nikiski. And we can do that with so many of our resources that are needed in the largest resource and consumer in the world, which is China. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Keith Meyer for some remarks, and then we'll take questions after that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Obviously, AGDC is very excited on this development. I presented to RDC also last week. I showed this picture, which has the signing, but I flanked the picture with activity on both sides, Washington and China, just to really show that this had a lot of buildup to get to this point at the very highest levels of both governments. So a lot of work went into this, getting to this point. Another picture I showed, and I'm going to leave you with a copy of these slides. This picture shows the quantity of resources that China consumes as a proportion of the world's consumption. And what you'll see is China is the largest consumer of raw materials on the planet. They have become that, and they probably will stay that for the rest of our lives. So for the industry, the LNG industry particularly, China is a big prize. The Asia market, the Asia Pacific market, is the largest buyer of LNG, and so for us that's significant. For the LNG industry it's significant. But when we approached Asia, we really approached it that Alaska is the prize. Alaska is the prize to win. And we say that because Alaska has the largest proven, conventional, but stranded resource of natural gas on the planet up at the North Slope. Fortunately, that resource sits right in the neighborhood of the Asia Pacific, which is the largest consumer of LNG on the planet. The only thing that separates those two things is this pipeline and the LNG plant. So we made a pretty hard push on Asia, on the Asian consuming nations. The visit of President Xi in April was very significant for us. It sort of changed our focus to China, but also changed China's focus to Alaska. We talked about the Alaska project to the president. He said to us, China has 100 years of LNG demand. And we said to him, Alaska has 100 years of LNG supply, so it's a beautiful marriage together. That really led to a lot of doors being opened in China at the government level and at the very large corporation and bank level. So we put a pretty hard push on China at talking with their ministries. The companies that are part of our joint development agreement are just outstanding. So as the governor mentioned, Sinopec, third largest corporation in the world by revenue, a very large buyer of natural gas and oil, perfect fit for us, #1 rated credit company in China. Bank of China, fourth largest bank in the world. The three above them are also Chinese owned. CIC Capital, that's their sovereign wealth fund, $813 billion under management. These companies have one thing in common. They are all owned by the nation of China. So they're all basically under the same control, under that government control. And so this is very much sort of we call it a G to G, government to government or sovereign to sovereign kind of relationship, where the state of Alaska comes to China as a government and AGDC as a company comes to these state-owned companies. So it's a beautiful fit. Every significant infrastructure or resource development project starts with something we'd call a letter of intent or an MOU, and then leads to more binding agreements down the road. There's a lot of due diligence, a lot of legal work that gets spent to get to those steps. This agreement is a joint development agreement because it is more than just a bilateral relationship between two companies. It involves all of these companies. So we've got buyer, banker, and investor all into one agreement. Again, all with one thread of commonality, that they're all controlled by China. And so we see this as very significant. Sinopec and Bank of China have been to Alaska, so they sent people to Alaska. We took them up to the North Slope. They've touched the resources up there. We took them to the Doyon folks. They stood in front of the Doyon rig. They went to the core lab in Anchorage here. One of the fellows on that tour is a very senior geologist in geology circles worldwide, but more particularly in China. I mean, they're down to the point where they're actually smelling the core samples. These folks are serious about this project. We have an electronic data room that they have spent hundreds of hours in due diligence. Their government folks have talked to our government folks, not just the state folks, but the federal folks, to see, is the U.S. going to be receptive? Is the U.S. Congress going to be receptive? And they've had very positive feedback on that. So we're very excited. We've got a big arrangement with them. There's a lot of work to do. We're looking at definitive agreements by the end of next year. One of the articles said, gosh, that's a very aggressive schedule. Yes, it is. It's very aggressive. And it's been an aggressive schedule really to get to this point as well. But I think we've got very willing parties. We're certainly willing on our side. And so that's the schedule we're going to pursue. Essentially, the points of the agreement, the Sinopec folks would take about 75% of the capacity of the facility. They would also provide the debt funding. China would provide the debt funding. So we call it basically debt for capacity. So we're getting debt, we're paying with capacity. Makes for a beautiful fit between the two. We need the funding to build the project. They want the capacity. And so it really gets the benefit of both, and both parties working together. The other 25% we will keep, and we will sell to regional markets. Korea, Vietnam, Japan, that type of thing. So that is the capacity, not the ownership. Ownership is separate. So right now, AGDC is 100% owner. We are talking to the Chinese folks about being an investor in the project, but they would be a minority investor, not a controlling investor. So AGDC, or let's call it Alaska, would remain in control of the project. So it's a very good arrangement for both. We've got a lot of work to do in the year ahead coming up to get to definitive agreements, but we're very excited, and now the industry has perked up as well, because there are people that sort of missed the Alaska opportunity. And so we're coming back with addressing questions from some of the people that didn't quite get there, saying, hey, can we still get some capacity? So we're excited. A lot of work to do, but it's a big game changer for us. So with that, thank you.
Okay. Questions?
Can we limit it to one at a time? I mean, one per reporter, because we're running really late on time. There are 4 people on the phone, so go ahead.
So, Alex, Alaska Dispatch News, if you clarify for me the $1 to $2 billion revenue stream Alaska would see over the life of the project. I thought that would change once the 20-year debt period ended. And then also, when you say revenue, are you talking profit? And then the second part of my question is, I think we need to put up $11 billion as a state to get to that point. And so I'm wondering where the $11 billion would come from to get the maybe 20 to 40 billion in revenue.
Okay, let me take those maybe in reverse order. So the 11 billion is the equity share of our 43. So 32 would come in debt, 11 billion in equity. That would come from either strategic investors, the state of Alaska, but also we'd like to have a structure that provides for Alaskan citizens, municipalities, and regional corporations to invest. And that's actually one of the requirements that we have under SB 138. So that 11 will come from equity investors, and the state of Alaska may be one. It's what I've said before, I'll say again, we want a structure where the state has the option to invest, but not necessarily the requirement. Now, in terms of the revenue, we're going to be taking revenue in. We've got a couple of numbers that are about $1 billion. So the equity return portion is about $1.1 billion. That goes to the owners that put in the $11 billion. Okay, so that's the equity return. We've got another number that's about $1 billion. That's for the gas supply. The state would be about 25% of that for the royalty. Then we've also got an operations and maintenance number plus PILT that's about $1.4 billion per year. That goes into the Alaskan economy, but it goes to the Alaskan workers, the contractors that do work on the route, that type of thing. That's our annual operation and maintenance expense. So it's sort of those three buckets.
Can you summarize for me, in 40 years when there's no more gas, how much Alaska has put into the project and how much we've gotten out of it?
First of all, there will be more gas after 40 years. We've got more than 100 years in there. Once you have a pipeline in, you'll start poking holes in the ground to get more gas out. So I envision this pipeline having well more than 100 years, just like the pipes in the lower 48. In terms of the math, take those numbers that I just told you and multiply them by 40. Now, once the debt is paid off, though, then we don't have that mortgage payment, which is about $3.5 billion a year. So once we stop that mortgage payment, then all that revenue comes back to the equity owners, so the owners of the system.
Okay, Alex, we have to move on. There are a lot of other reporters.
Governor, yesterday Lisa Wilcox said that if the gas starts flowing, that households in the state could expect $1,000 per year in savings. Is that on the line, or is that everybody in Alaska?
I'll take that. That's sort of an average kind of a number. And I forgot to mention, we put together a little talking piece that you folks will have today, and we're also going to put an insert in the newspaper. That's sort of an average number for Anchorage people, rail belt people. If you look at Fairbanks folks, it'll be quite a bit more than that savings. But what that represents is the approximate cost of gas supply plus pipeline transport down to southern Alaska, including the interior.
So would it be everybody on the line, or like
We call it sort of the rail belt region. So right now you've got Anchorage that has gas. Fairbanks does not, right? So when Fairbanks displaces their oil, they're paying a very high price today. So they'll have a significant drop. The Anchorage folks will see a drop not as significant as Fairbanks. You sort of take those together, it's about $1,000 average per year.
Let me just add to Joel, answer to Joel. Also in Senate Bill 138 is a requirement 20% of the revenue to the state was set aside for rural energy projects and whatnot. So it's not just the rail belt or the, in those in line with the pipeline route it goes, the benefit goes beyond that to pretty much all communities and whatnot. So.
And I would just highlight too, in China, much of their LNG is actually distributed to rural communities by truck. And so they operate thousands of trucks that just deliver LNG to rural communities. So I envision some of that happening here as well.
I was reading through the agreement, the tentative agreement, obviously not a final, but and it seemed like Sinopec is very interested in engineering, procurement, construction, project management. It almost sounds like they want to be in charge of the project. I mean, who will build this? Who will be in charge?
So who will be in charge is AGDC. So AGDC is in charge of the project, full stop. In terms of services like engineering, module fabrication, Sinopec has actually built a pipeline in China that's longer than ours, has a higher altitude peak. They've also built a gas treating plant that's going to be larger than ours, or that is larger than ours. We sent a technical team to China. They gave us a 3-day full seminar where presidents from their subsidiaries came in, talked to us. We went to the Pipeline Operations Center. They have a lot of capability to do engineering and design work for a large pipeline. Also, module fabrication. A number of the modules that are built here could be built in China. So like the gas treating plant is largely a bunch of modules that get built elsewhere and floated into place. But I don't see significant activity in the area of construction in terms of boots on the ground here.
So who would build it?
Well, we're looking at large contractors. So we've been in discussions with large contractors that have the capability to build the pipeline. If you look at TAPS, a lot of people think Fluor and Bechtel sort of combined together to build that. Actually, the people that did the work are local contractors that are under management by a large EPC firm, engineering, procurement, construction firm. So we envision employing large, capable firms to handle the construction oversight, but a lot of the labor is right here.
Wesley, Caslin, any questions? If not, we're going to move to the phone. Rasha, go ahead and unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so Ross McChesney, Alaska's Energy Desk. There have been a number of lawmakers criticizing AGDC for a lack of transparency, and some have been asked to sign confidentiality agreements to get basic information about how the corporation is spending its money. Governor Walker, you campaigned in part on making AGDC more transparent and even asked some board members not to sign confidentiality agreements. So I'm wondering what's changed.
You know, we are making this this available, making this public. The joint development agreement. We could have gone through perhaps some gyration to not, and so we are making that available. The negotiations that they're actually in negotiations. You know, those are sensitive. We're competing with other projects all over the world that would love to look into the details of what they're negotiating, and so that you have to be sensitive to when you're working with other corporations that are participating. So we're certainly making this available, and I know not everybody is happy necessarily with how things have transpired, but I guess I think that the proof is a bit in the result. And I think that we have a very good result from where we are today.
Thanks, Rasha. Tim, next question. Okay, moving on. Becky.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Meyer and one for the governor. Mr. Meyer, can you talk about how the responsibilities of some of the different items laid out in the JVA will be divvied up between the state and the different agencies who will be responsible for what? And then for the governor, you know, one of the concerns you had with the other framework was, you know, you mentioned concerns that, say, Exxon could, you know, pursue a different project in another part of the country or another part of the world that would compete with the LNG project. And this JVA has a non-exclusivity clause as well. Can you explain maybe why that doesn't give you the same amount of heartburn that the prior arrangement did?
I'll take the Exxon one.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll take the first one. So in terms of the work activities, it's really AGDC that's going to be taking the point on coordinating all of the activities. There is, though, interest by Sinopec on looking at getting involved more in the oil and gas business in Alaska, so that would involve a DNR or that type of thing. Also, Mr. Hendricks, the oil and gas advisor to the governor, has been involved in our trips. So the way I look at this is it's basically all hands on deck, and the hands that we need will be on deck. But AGDC will continue to be the point for the project.
And Becky, your question about the, I guess it would be gas supply. This is a different approach. This is the sovereign acting as a sovereign. It's something we have not done in the past. You know, the companies that we've worked with in the past all have competing projects around the world, and good for them. They're successful companies, and we celebrate their success. But putting Alaska's gas out in front may not be in their best interest, and so that's why one of the advantages of us being in the Alaska being in the lead on this is to make sure that our opportunity is presented to the market. And if that hadn't happened in February 2016, I would not be standing here today talking to you about these world leaders in energy projects about this opportunity for Alaska. So it's a matter of Alaska representing Alaska.
All right, final question goes to James Brooks, Juneau Empire.
Thank you. Governor, is the timeline on the JDA being driven by next year's election?
Good question. No. Actually, I did not know the timeline. I saw the timeline for the first time in Washington, D.C. When it was sent to me, already initialed. First time I saw it, it was all negotiated without any input from me, and so no, it's absolutely not.
All right.
And if I may, from Mr. Meyer, what is the next step? What will we in Alaska see happen next?
Well, with respect to this deal, there's going to be a lot of interface between all three of the entities mentioned here and ourselves. There's going to be trips to China, trips from them to Alaska. So a lot of due diligence, a lot of papering. We've got a multinational, multi-billion-dollar purchase agreement, lending agreement, investment agreement. We've got a regulatory process that we're trying to get through by the end of next year. All of that really focuses on our timeline, which is we want to have everything done basically by the end of next year so that we can take a final investment decision in the first part of 2019, enabling construction to start in 2019. So a lot of activity on all fronts in 2018. What this arrangement does is provide a lot of focus for us to focus on these entities and the specific deal at hand.
All right. Thanks, guys.
And 11 billion or 5 billion, we get 30 billion. What is the summary of that?
Well, on the 11, I mean, you get your 1.1 billion a year for 20 years, and then we've got an asset that is basically delivering about 5 to 6 billion a year, which we've said you could easily monetize at a 10 times multiple, so that's 50 billion after that 20-year payoff. So once you pay off the mortgage.
Haven't you guys summarized the numbers though?
I just did.
Do it again. Can you just tell me?
Okay, so you get about 1.1 billion a year for the 20 years. That goes to the owners, the equity.
That's 1 to 2 billion is what Walker said. So
and then you've got, after the mortgage is paid off, you still own the pipe and it's still having revenue that's about 5 to 6 billion a year if we don't change the tariff. So if we don't raise it or that. So you've got something that's bringing back about 5 to 6 billion a year. So if you turned around and sold that to a Berkshire Hathaway or a strategic, you could sell it for about 10 times that revenue number. So call that about $50 billion. If you wanted to sell the whole pipeline and LNG system.
I don't think we're talking about selling it though. I think we're talking about holding on to it and making money.
Well, okay, then it's if you hold it, which would be a good recommendation, you got 5 to 6 billion a year until the gas runs out, which
so
I say is 100 years.
What Governor Walker just said. So you're saying it's 1.1 billion plus 5 to 6 billion?
1.1 billion while you're paying your mortgage payment. So that goes on for 20 years, let's say.
Okay.
After your mortgage is paid off,
Another 20
you're
years.
still making revenue
5 to 6 billion.
per year.
Okay.
For how many years?
I still think that's higher. That's still higher than what Governor Walker said. So
It's the number that we show that in our board reports. We've shown it to legislature. It's a graph that's got bars that go on for about 20 years that hit about a $2 billion kind of a number. And then after that mortgage is paid off, you're at 5 to 6 billion, which I think is conservative.
okay. So bottom line that I'm getting is 1.1 billion the first 20 years to Alaska, potential 5 to 6 billion after that.
Yes, yeah, except the 1.1 is for the equity owners. Don't forget, there's 1.4 billion that stays into the Alaskan economy for O&M and PILT. That's all within the Alaskan economy. And then you've got another billion for gas supply, of which the
What
state,
we're talking about was the
of which
billion I
the
was
state
talking-
is 25.
was the gas supply. We're selling our gas.
That's
And
$1
so-
billion a year.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's higher than $1 to $2 billion over the 40-year life of it.
Selling the gas is different than the return on the equity. I mean, there's about 5 different buckets of where the money would come from.
It is. And so if the state were the equity investor, when you add the royalty, when you add the PILT, and the economic boost with the O&M, it's a significant benefit.
But Governor Walker said $1 to $2 billion in revenues, and it sounds like.
That's on the gas supply.
That's just on gas. Okay, I didn't hear
Yeah.
that the first time. All right. Thank you.
And don't forget
And
to
still, we're, but.
pick this up.
For the 4-year life. All right.